The rain started early that evening, a slow drizzle that turned the air cool and heavy. Margaret Harper stood at her kitchen window, watching drops slide down the glass as she finished washing the last dish. Her house always felt too big when her daughter Lily wasn't home. Since her husband passed 5 years ago, silence had become part of her evenings, familiar, yet never quite comfortable. Lily had gone to visit her boyfriend, Daniel, a polite young man Margaret liked more than she admitted. He was respectful, always greeted her with a smile, and never came empty-handed. Still, she didn't know him well enough to call him family. He seemed a little too quiet, a little too careful. Like someone still finding his place in the world, the clock on the wall ticked softly as thunder rumbled in the distance. Margaret wrapped her cardigan tighter around her shoulders and took a sip of tea. She hoped Lily would drive carefully in this weather. The rain soon thickened, tapping hard against the windows. Then headlights flashed through the curtains. She smiled, thinking her daughter had come home early, but when the doorbell rang and she opened it, her smile faded into surprise. It was Daniel. He stood in the doorway, drenched from head to toe. His hair clung to his forehead, his jacket dripped onto the porch, and his expression was a mix of apology and exhaustion. "Daniel," she said, her voice full of concern. "What are you doing out in this weather? Is Lily okay?" "She's fine," he replied, catching his breath. "She forgot her overnight bag here. I went to get it, but my car stalled about 2 blocks away. I thought I could walk, but—" he gestured helplessly to his soaked clothes. "The rain caught me." Margaret stepped aside instantly. "Come in before you catch a cold." He hesitated, clearly uncomfortable about intruding, but she gave him that motherly look no one could argue with. He finally stepped inside, wiping his shoes on the mat. "I didn't mean to bother you, Mrs. Harper," he said quietly. "It's no bother," she said, already walking toward the hallway. "You can't go back out there right now. Sit down, I'll grab you a towel." She returned with one of the soft old towels from the linen closet and handed it to him. He smiled shyly, murmuring thanks as he dried his hair. The kitchen lights glowed warmly, the storm outside making the small house feel almost cozy. Margaret filled the kettle again, deciding another pot of tea wouldn't hurt. "You can stay until it clears up," she said, glancing at him. "The roads will be a mess." He looked grateful but uncertain. "I don't want to be a burden." "You're not? Sit. You look like you could use something hot." He smiled a little, the kind of smile that came more from relief than comfort, and sat at the kitchen table. His manners reminded her of someone raised right, patient, respectful. The kind who said thank you even for the smallest kindness, as she poured 2 cups of tea. He glanced around the kitchen, noticing the small things: family photos, recipe cards by the fridge, a candle flickering on the counter. "You keep a beautiful home," he said softly. "It feels peaceful here." Margaret smiled faintly. "It's quiet, that's for sure." He looked down at his cup, then back up at her. "Lily says you do everything yourself. The house, the garden, even the repairs." She chuckled, setting the kettle aside. "I've learned too. When you live alone long enough, you either wait for help or figure it out. I chose the second option." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "Lily's right about you then. She said you're the strongest woman she knows." The compliment caught her off guard. It wasn't flirtatious, just honest, simple. Still, it warmed her chest in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. "That's kind of her," she said quietly. "But, strong or not, I still miss having someone around to help." They talked a little more about small things. He told her he grew up in Maine, that his mother still wrote letters by hand even though she had a phone, and that he worked part-time at an auto shop while saving for college. His voice carried sincerity, something Margaret found rare these days. As he spoke, she realized how easy it was to talk to him. Maybe it was his calm nature, or maybe it was because she hadn't had anyone to talk to over tea in a long time. Outside, thunder rolled again, and the power flickered for a second. She sighed, shaking her head. "This old house hates storms," she said. He smiled. "Then I guess it's good you've got company tonight." There was something simple, kind, and grounding about those words. For the first time in months, she didn't feel the weight of loneliness pressing down. They shared soup, just leftovers she'd warmed up, and the sound of rain against the windows filled the quiet moments between them. When it got late, Margaret stood and looked out the window. The storm showed no sign of stopping. "You can't drive home like this," she said firmly. "The guest room is made up. Stay the night." He started to refuse, but she cut him off gently. "Daniel, I'm not sending anyone's son into that storm. I'd never forgive myself, and neither would Lily." That made him laugh softly, a genuine laugh that showed how much he respected her. "All right," he said finally. "Thank you, Mrs. Harper, really." She showed him the guest room and fetched a spare blanket, fluffing the pillow like she used to do for Lily when she was little. He thanked her again, his voice low and sincere. "You didn't have to do all this," he said, standing at the door. "I know," she replied, smiling gently. "But sometimes doing something kind makes the world a little warmer." He looked at her for a second longer than expected, as though he wanted to say something else. But instead, he just said, "Good night." Margaret went to bed, listening to the wind howl outside. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel entirely alone. She thought about Daniel's polite smile, the kindness in his words, and the quiet comfort he brought to the evening. Maybe it was nothing, just gratitude from a young man raised well. But as she closed her eyes, she couldn't shake the feeling that something about that night had changed things in a small, quiet way. And, though she didn't know it yet, the next morning, Daniel's words would leave her completely speechless and open a door in her heart she thought had long been closed. Morning came quietly after the storm. The air was cool and smelled of wet grass and coffee brewing in the kitchen. Margaret woke earlier than usual, drawn by habit more than need. The rain had stopped some time before dawn, leaving behind a gray, misty calm. For a moment, she forgot Daniel was in the guest room. The thought came back only when she saw a second cup on the counter and a faint sound of footsteps behind her. "Good morning," Danielle said softly. He was dressed in a clean t-shirt, his hair still a little messy from sleep. There was something gentle about his presence, unhurried and polite. He looked younger in the daylight, but there was a steadiness in his voice that made him seem older. "Morning," she said, smiling faintly. "I hope you slept well." "I did. Thank you again for letting me stay," he replied, glancing toward the window. "It's beautiful here in the morning. Peaceful." She nodded, pouring coffee into 2 cups. "It's quiet, yes?" "Sometimes too quiet." He chuckled softly. "I can see that. My place is the opposite. Constant noise from the street, the neighbor's dog barking." They sat at the table, the same one where they'd shared tea the night before. The air was filled with that easy silence that only happens when 2 people feel comfortable without needing to fill every pause. Margaret handed him a plate of toast and smiled when he thanked her again. "You really don't have to be so polite all the time," she said warmly. "It's how I was raised," he replied with a grin. "My mom says good manners never go out of style." "It's a good mother," she said. "You remind me of my husband in that way." He was the same calm patient, always thinking before he spoke. Her eyes drifted to the old photo hanging on the wall, her late husband smiling beside her. Their daughter, just a little girl then. Daniel followed her gaze and said softly, "He looks like a kind man." "He was," she said quietly. "It's been years, but some days it feels like yesterday." There was compassion in Daniel's expression, not pity, just understanding. "Lily told me he passed when she was still in high school," he said gently. "That must have been hard." Margaret nodded, taking a sip of her coffee. "It was. Losing him changed everything. But you learn to carry on. You find small things to be thankful for, like mornings like this." Daniel smiled. "You're stronger than you think." She looked up at him, surprised again by how easily his words carried warmth. It wasn't what he said, but how he said it, calm, genuine, as if he truly meant it. She found herself wondering how someone his age could be so thoughtful. They talked as the morning light filled the kitchen about Lily's work, about Daniel's plans to study architecture, and about small memories that surfaced naturally. He told her how he used to help his grandfather build birdhouses in the summer. He said every house, no matter how small, should be built with care, Daniel said with a soft smile. Margaret smiled back. He sounds wise. He was, Daniel replied. Sometimes I wish I'd paid more attention. I think that's what I like about Lily. She notices things other people miss. That comment made Margaret's heart soften. She could see why her daughter liked him. He spoke with a kind of honesty that was rare. And he never seemed to rush his words. They spent the rest of the morning tidying up after breakfast. Daniel insisted on helping with the dishes. Please, he said when she tried to stop him. You've done enough for me already, she laughed. All right, but you're drying. The simple rhythm of washing and drying filled the room, clinking plates, running water, the hum of the fridge. There was something peaceful about it, like an unspoken understanding between them. When they were done, Daniel leaned against the counter and looked around the kitchen. You've made this place feel alive, he said quietly. It's not just a house, it feels like a home. Margaret felt her throat tighten slightly. It used to feel fuller, she admitted. Now it's just me most days. Lily visits when she can, but she has her own life now. He nodded thoughtfully. That's how it goes. We grow up and forget how much our parents gave up for us. She looked at him with a small smile. You're very young to speak like that, he laughed softly. Maybe, but it's true. Then his expression shifted, more serious now. Mrs. Harper, can I tell you something? Of course, she said. He hesitated, glancing at the mug in his hands. Last night when I got stuck in the rain, I didn't know where to go at first. I didn't want to bother anyone. But when I thought of you, I just felt like I could come here. You remind me of my mom, in a way. The way you listen, the way you make people feel welcome. Margaret blinked, her heart softening at his honesty. That's one of the nicest things anyone's ever said to me, she said quietly. He smiled almost shyly. I meant it. You have a kindness that makes people feel safe. There was a pause. Not uncomfortable, but deep and thoughtful. The kind of silence that holds emotion words can't fully express. Then Margaret stood up, changing the subject lightly. You should call Lily. She'll worry if she doesn't know where you are. He nodded, pulling out his phone. You're right. While he talked to her daughter in the other room, Margaret leaned against the counter, lost in thought. She hadn't felt this scene this genuinely appreciated in a long time. There was nothing romantic in Daniel's words. But they touched something tender inside her. Something that had been quiet for years. A few minutes later, he returned, smiling. She says thank you for taking care of me and that she's sorry for sending me out in the rain. Margaret laughed softly. Tell her I forgive her. He checked the time, and his expression grew a little reluctant. I should probably go now. Roads are better, and I don't want to overstay my welcome. You're welcome here any time. Daniel, she said sincerely. He smiled, and for a moment their eyes met, two people from different worlds. Different ages, yet somehow connected through kindness and understanding. He thanked her once more, shook her hand gently, and walked out into the morning light. Margaret watched him leave, standing by the window long after his car disappeared. The house grew quiet again, but it didn't feel as heavy as before. There was something new lingering in the air, warmth, gratitude, maybe even a spark of hope. That night, when she went to bed, she found a small note on the kitchen table. Daniel had left it behind, his handwriting neat and simple. Thank you for reminding me what kindness looks like. You made a stranger feel at home. Margaret smiled through tears she didn't expect. She pressed the note to her chest, feeling both the ache and beauty of being remembered. She didn't know it yet. But that message, simple and sincere, would change how she saw herself, her past, and her future in ways she never imagined. A few days passed after Daniel's unexpected visit. But his words and that handwritten note stayed with Margaret. Every time she walked by the kitchen table, she caught herself glancing at it. The note was still there, tucked under a small glass vase of fresh daisies. Thank you for reminding me what kindness looks like. You made a stranger feel at home. Simple words. Yet they carried something that went beyond politeness. They carried sincerity, warmth, and a quiet kind of admiration. Margaret's days returned to their usual rhythm. Mornings with tea and news. Afternoons in the garden, evenings filled with the sound of wind through the trees. Yet everything seemed a little different now. The air in the house felt softer, lighter, as if something had shifted inside her. She realized how long it had been since someone noticed her, not for what she'd done, but for who she was. One Thursday morning, she was baking blueberry muffins when her phone rang. It was Lily. "Hey, Mom," her daughter said, cheerful as always. "Daniel told me he stayed the night when the storm hit. Thank you for taking care of him. He couldn't stop talking about how nice you were." Margaret smiled, even though Lily couldn't see it. "He's a polite young man. You found someone good, sweetheart." "I think so," Lily said with a small laugh. "He's different, isn't he? Thoughtful." "He is," Margaret agreed. After they hung up, she sat quietly with her tea, thinking about how life kept bringing unexpected people into her world. People who reminded her that kindness still mattered. That small gestures could leave lasting impressions. Daniel had been just a guest for one night. Yet his presence had stirred something she hadn't felt in years. A sense of connection that evening. As the sky turned gold and pink, she heard a familiar sound outside. A car pulling into the driveway. She wiped her hands and peeked out the window. It was Daniel Dot. She stepped out onto the porch as he got out of the car holding a paper bag. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said with an apologetic smile. "Lily had to work late and I was in the area. I thought I'd drop this off just to thank you." "You didn't have to do that," Margaret said, surprised but touched. "It's just muffins," he said, laughing softly. "I tried to make them like yours, but they probably turned out nothing like it." She smiled, motioning him inside. "You'll have to let me be the judge of that." Inside, the kitchen filled with the smell of coffee and laughter. They sat together again, much like that stormy night, but the mood was lighter now. Daniel told her about his job interviews, his plans to save up for college, the small apartment he wanted to rent closer to work. "You sound like someone with a plan," she said warmly. He smiled. "Trying to be. I learned a lot from my grandfather. He always said that even when you don't have everything figured out, you can still move forward one step at a time." Margaret nodded, stirred by his maturity. "He sounds wise." "You remind me of my husband sometimes," she said softly. "He used to say something similar, that life isn't about having control, it's about having faith." Daniel looked at her with quiet admiration. "I wish more people talked like that. These days, everyone wants quick answers, fast results, but you make things feel grounded." She smiled, feeling her cheeks warm slightly. "That's just age and experience talking." "No," he said gently. "That's wisdom." For a moment, neither of them spoke. There was no awkwardness, only the comfort of being understood. The air between them carried a quiet warmth, not romantic, but human, full of respect and connection. Later, as Daniel stood to leave, he hesitated near the doorway. "Mrs. Harper," he said, almost uncertainly, "I just wanted to say something." She turned to him, curious. "What is it?" He took a breath. "That night when I was here, I realized something. You reminded me of how important it is to be kind, to listen, to care about people without expecting anything back. It made me want to be better, to do better." Margaret was caught off guard. "Daniel," she began softly. He continued, "You probably don't realize it, but you've changed how I see things. People don't usually stop and notice others anymore. But you did. You made me feel seen." His words struck something deep inside her, a quiet ache that came from years of feeling invisible. She wanted to say something, but her voice caught for a moment. When she finally spoke, it came out gentle. "That's one of the kindest things anyone has ever said to me." He smiled, his eyes sincere. "It's true. You remind people what goodness looks like." She felt tears sting her eyes, not out of sadness, but from being touched. For so long she had lived quietly, doing small things that went unnoticed. And here was this young man, her daughter's boyfriend, telling her that those small things still mattered. After he left, Margaret stood by the window again, watching his car disappear down the street. The house was silent, but it didn't feel empty anymore. His words echoed softly in her mind, blending with the sound of the evening breeze. Later that night, she took out an old photo album. The pictures inside were faded, snapshots of her younger years, her husband, Lily, as a child. Each photo told a story of a life well lived, but also of love and loss. As she turned the pages, she realized something she had spent years taking care of everyone else and had forgotten to take care of herself. Daniel's kindness had reminded her of something she had buried long ago, that her heart still had room for connection, for warmth, for the simple beauty of being seen. She thought about how easily people drift through life without saying what they feel, how a few kind words can change someone's day or even their life before going to bed. She wrote a short note and placed it on the kitchen table, the same spot where Daniel had left his message. It said, "Sometimes we meet people not by accident, but as reminders that kindness still exists. Thank you for reminding me." She didn't know if she would ever show it to him, but writing it felt right, like closing a circle. That night, she slept peacefully, her mind calm. The rain had returned lightly outside, tapping against the windows. It didn't sound lonely anymore. It sounded like a quiet song, one that promised hope. And for the first time in years, Margaret felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Not grief, not emptiness, but gratitude. Gratitude for chance encounters, for meaningful words, and for the reminder that life, even in its quietest moments, could still surprise her. She didn't know what would come next, whether Daniel would stop by again, or if this was just a small chapter in her long story, but she knew one thing for sure: she was awake again, alive in ways she thought she'd forgotten. Weeks passed quietly after Daniel's last visit. The days grew shorter, and autumn painted the trees in golden shades. Margaret's life had settled back into her peaceful routine, but something inside her had changed. She smiled more often now, spoke kindly to strangers at the market, and even started baking again for the neighbors. It felt as if Daniel's kindness had awakened a light she didn't know still existed within her. One crisp Saturday morning, she was trimming the rose bushes when she saw a familiar car pull into the driveway. It was Daniel again. He stepped out holding a box, his smile bright as always. "Good morning, Mrs. Harper," he called. "I brought something for you." Margaret brushed off her gloves and met him halfway. "Daniel, what a nice surprise. What's all this?" He opened the box to reveal a small potted plant. "A peace lily," he said. "I thought it might go well near your window. You told me once that you liked quiet plants, the ones that grow without too much fuss." Margaret's heart warmed. "That's very thoughtful of you. Come in, it's chilly out." They stepped into the kitchen, and soon the air filled with the smell of coffee and freshly baked bread. They sat across from each other, sunlight streaming through the window, making the moment feel timeless. Daniel looked around, smiling softly. "Your house feels different every time I come here. Lighter." She nodded. "That's because I finally started opening the curtains again." He laughed gently, but then his face grew serious. "Mrs. Harper, I wanted to tell you something. I got the job I was hoping for, a full-time one. It's nothing fancy, but it's a start." Margaret beamed. "That's wonderful news. I knew you'd do it." "Thank you," he said. "Honestly, I don't think I would have had the courage to try without that talk we had. You told me to move forward one step at a time. I kept thinking about that." Her eyes softened. "You did the work yourself, Daniel. You believed in yourself, and that's what matters." He smiled but hesitated before continuing. "Lily and I are planning to move closer to the city. It's going to be a big change. I'll be busy for a while, but I didn't want to leave without saying thank you. You've become someone important in my life, like family." Those words struck Margaret deeply. She blinked away tears and tried to hide her emotion behind a gentle smile. "That means a lot, dear. More than you know." There was a brief silence before Daniel spoke again. "You remind me of my grandmother. She passed away when I was young, but you have the same kindness in your eyes. She used to say, when you meet good people, don't forget them. So I won't forget you." Margaret's voice trembled slightly. "And I won't forget you either." He reached across the table and gently squeezed her hand, a simple gesture that carried all the warmth and respect of family. For a moment, she saw the boy he must have once been, hopeful and good-hearted, and she felt proud of the man he was becoming. Later that afternoon, they went out to the garden together. Daniel helped her trim the overgrown branches and laughed when she scolded him for cutting too much. The air was cool, filled with falling leaves and the distant sound of wind chimes. It felt peaceful, like a perfect goodbye. Before leaving, Daniel turned to her. "I'll visit whenever I can. And you have to promise me something. Keep baking those muffins." "They're magic," she laughed. "Deal. But only if you promise to keep chasing your dreams." "Always," he said with a grin, after he drove away. Margaret stood by the gate for a long moment, watching his car disappear down the road. A part of her felt sad, but another part felt whole. Life had given her a rare gift, a connection that crossed generations, built not on blood but on kindness and shared humanity. That evening, as the sky faded into shades of lavender, Margaret went inside and placed the peace lily on her kitchen windowsill. The plant looked delicate but strong, much like how she felt now. She brewed herself a cup of tea and sat quietly by the window, thinking about how life can surprise us even in its later chapters. She realized something profound. Happiness wasn't always about grand moments or lifelong plans. Sometimes it came from the brief connections that reminded you that you still mattered, that your presence could make a difference in someone else's story. Over the next few months, Margaret continued to write small notes, letters she never sent but kept in a box. She wrote about her days, her memories, and the lessons she'd learned from Daniel. It became her new way of staying connected, her way of reminding herself that kindness echoes far beyond a single meeting. One winter morning, she received a letter in the mail. It was from Daniel. Inside was a photo of him and Lily smiling together outside their new apartment. At the bottom, he'd written, "Thank you for being my reminder that good people still exist. Every time I make a decision, I think of what you would say to do it with kindness." Margaret smiled as tears filled her eyes. She placed the photo on the mantel beside an old picture of her husband and whispered softly, "He would have liked you, Daniel." That night, she lit a small candle and watched the flame flicker. The house was quiet, but it no longer felt lonely. It felt alive, filled with stories, memories, and the echo of laughter. She realized that even though people come and go, their kindness stays. It becomes part of the home, part of the heart. Months later, when spring returned, the peace lily had grown beautifully, its leaves glossy and full. Margaret often looked at it and thought of Daniel, of how one unexpected visit during a storm had led to something far greater: friendship, gratitude, and the rediscovery of joy. On one of those bright mornings, she sat by the window, sipping her tea, and whispered to herself, "Maybe that's what life is, a series of unexpected connections that remind us we're never truly alone." And in that quiet moment, surrounded by sunlight and the scent of blooming flowers, Margaret felt a deep, peaceful contentment. She didn't need anything more. She had found what she didn't even know she was missing: hope, kindness, and the beautiful truth that it's never too late to feel alive again.